This video is in response to a claim by Condor 999 for an alternative view. The original review can be found here. The alternative view is reported here on SimHQ. The claim is that the maps are not cluttered and that the review has been selective and deceptive in selecting the images shown. The screen caps are, in fact, it is the other way around. It is the counterclaim which is using selective screen captures and deceptive claims. We'll start off with the claim. In the original review, the inability to turn off graphic features was noted as a problem. This topic was originally raised and discussed on the Punta de Lanza forum, or spearhead in Spanish. The claim is players are inundated with information from a single map display. Not all data may be deemed necessary or helpful to the player, but there are few ways to limit this flood. This image depicts numerous self-imposed images and their warnings over North Vietnam. So much data and so many warnings are given that they blur together and prevent usefulness. At present, there is no way to turn off the superfluous data, especially the mouse over black box. A window menu similar to the message options is desperately needed to stem this tide. Galahad 78 raised a very valid point. The player can disable the map settings, contact emissions for all. So this is the original image that was in the review. Once the sensor emissions are turned off, settings for the enemy contacts, this does reduce the snowstorm effect over the target. This would mean that the inbound missiles, time of contact, target count, and health bars will remain because they can't be turned off. However, the topic in question is the inability to turn off graphic features. This merely delays the congestion. For the purposes of this discussion, all these images are in 1280 by 720 resolution. This is the original, or similar to the original image. Notice the snowstorm effect over North Vietnam. This can be turned off under the contact emissions none. This does help. Notice how the major reports are gone. However, the number of targets and, well, there aren't any missiles inbound yet, but the number of targets and the time of detection remain. So it's cleared up, but it isn't still perfect. Notice we're at the altitude of nearly 500,000 meters. The counterclaim is that somehow this is too far, this is too high. Well, at this altitude, at any altitude, it's a given that if we zoom in right to 500 meters or closer, of course we can eliminate any and all possible confusion and congestion. You just have to zoom in far enough. Unfortunately, zooming into an altitude of 700 meters or possibly less makes the game unplayable because you can't see anything. So it's granted that congestion and confusion can be eliminated if you zoom in far enough. It's kind of pointless. So, in conclusion, the sensory emission being turned off does help, but it doesn't help very much for very long. In this image, as the image is clarified, as the strike planes arrive over the target, the congestion returns as irremovable red, yellow, and green, white bars that cover the target and the inbound planes. Do note this is at a fairly high zoom in or very low altitude at only 25,000, and we are still getting all this congestion. At the 400,000 or 500,000 meter altitude, this would just be a blob. The crux of the matter is the inability to turn off graphic features. The counter review tries to mislead readers by suggesting that the weapon's range rings were somehow part of the initially reported problem. They were not, since the weapon range rings can be turned off and thus are not part of the reported problem. Also, the range rings are needed. The merge range ring function does not solve the problem either. This function was not discussed in the review since it was not adjudged to be very useful. It's only discussed at this time in response to the counter review claim that the function helps. Here is an example of the air-to-air weapons range ring in pink. Once the range rings are merged, the resulting information is virtually worthless. The largest range rings mask the range rings of the shorter ranged weapons, which are necessary. Personally, I find this of very limited use. However, other players may find it more useful. Also, the counter review presents a map from an altitude of only 180,000 meters, while the original map shows an altitude of 480,000 meters. The higher altitude is required in order to see both the target and the player's base. Of course, as shown earlier, all clutter will disappear if the player zooms the camera down far enough to an altitude of 100 meters or 2,000, maybe 1,000 meters. Even if this would be silly and impractical. I have no idea why anyone would try to use the merge function except to try and hide the fact that the screen is already so cluttered. 25,000 meters, 500,000 meters, 180,000 meters.